All right, my sermon's not about Job, but I have to call this out real quick. Oh, that my words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Well, there you go, Job. We did it for you. We put them in a book. And actually, he's even said, iron pen with lead engraved on rock forever. And it's not uncommon to see those words in stone, like on a church, where it says, for I know that my Redeemer lives. And it is one of my favorite verses, certainly in the Old Testament. I know that my Redeemer lives. And this isn't a person who's just standing in front of a church or who just got a promotion or just got married. He's like, huzzah, God is real, you know. This is a person who has been through it. And more words that I won't say. And he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. And who is that Redeemer? That Redeemer is Jesus, and Jesus had some words in the gospel, and that is what my sermon will be about. Jesus' words in the gospel we just read, which is a very strange one. It's a strange gospel. It starts off with these Sadducees, who we know the Sadducees to be debaters. The Pharisees and the Sadducees both. Different perspectives. Pharisees believe in the resurrection. Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. That's basically their day planner for the day is like wake up, argue with the Pharisees about resurrection, have lunch, argue some more with the Pharisees about resurrection, have dinner. And so they're constantly trying to win this debate. So they approach Jesus with this very bizarre kind of argument to make their case. And you can just tell they debated this amongst each other beforehand. They were all getting together saying, okay, guys, we really need to peg Jesus on this. We need to get him to make a mistake. We need to trip him up, and we need to prove that there is no resurrection. So we're looking for no bad ideas here. Let's just brainstorm. Let's figure something out. And somebody says, well, what about levirate marriage? Like, what do you mean? Well, you know, Moses said that if a married man dies and he has a brother, who's unmarried, the brother should marry that woman. And they're like, okay, what's your point? Well, imagine there's 7 of them in a row, and it just keeps happening. And then you have to ask the question, well, if there's such a thing as a resurrection, what do you do about this problem? That is weird. That is a strange way. Those of you who've been in debate, I'm looking for Jonathan. He's probably back with his brother. Like, that's not how you do it. That's not how you make your case. But this guy apparently had some sway among the Sadducees, and they're all like, well, we hate your idea, but we're not going to argue with you, so go ahead. So they present this idea to Jesus, and they say, hey, we're going to prove there's no resurrection, and this is how we're going to do it. And they tell Jesus about this, you know, the oldest brother and the second oldest brother, and all the way down to 7. And the 7th brother dies, the 7th husband dies, there's still no child. And I can't imagine this is the first thing Jesus said in response. The first thing he probably said is, that poor woman. She had to bury 7 husbands. Are you serious? And no children? And then she probably died because, like, I am so done with this. And she's like, I'm out of here. Just take me, right? So the interesting thing is here we have, it's supposed to be a conversation about resurrection. Is death the end? Or is death a transition into something else, maybe something better? That's the topic at hand. And we bring up this whole complicated levirate marriage thing, and as if that's going to prove the point. And Jesus knows, Jesus is famous he's brilliant at knowing the point, right? Sometimes when you don't even say what the point is, you ask him a question and Jesus is like, I know why you're asking this. So I'm not going to even answer your actual question you asked, or maybe I barely will, because I'm going to address what's in your heart. And so obviously Jesus knows this whole thing is about resurrection, and he's not missing the point, but he says, you know what? I'm going to bite. I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about marriage. But I'm going to do it in a context of resurrection and say, yes, there is a resurrection. And this marriage problem that you pose, this scenario, is not an issue for the concept of resurrection, because you're seeing resurrection as basically just like Well, just the next life. Just, okay, well, you died here in Jerusalem, and then now you're a baby in Damascus or whatever, and now you got to do it all over again. And Jesus is like, you are completely misconceiving what resurrection is. I'm going to say you use marriage as an argument against it, but marriage is for this, and resurrection is something else. So I want to dig into that for a minute. Because marriage is good. It is a good thing. Is it a necessary thing? No. Should everyone be married? No. Does every marriage last until death do us part? No. Some marriages fail. That doesn't make the members of a failed marriage failures in themselves. Nor does it negate the goodness of marriage. And we see that spoken over and over in Scripture. Where Jesus talks and the apostles talk about marriage as being like as a symbol of Christ and the church. And they talk about what love ought to look like. So we have this opportunity here in this plane, in this corporeal plane of ours, to get a little trial run as to what unconditional love looks like. And to me, this is just one example of how the whole biblical story is an exercise in moving from the particular to the universal, from the small to the big. And Jesus even says this in some of his parables, where he says, you who are faithful with little will then be trusted with. How can you be trusted with big things? Until you have shown yourself faithful with the small things. And for us, marriage is a big deal. But in the larger scheme, it's one of those small things that Jesus says, I want to trust you. I want to give you a chance to try this out. Pick one person, or at least one at a time. And try to love that person unconditionally. And when you mess up, try again. And you mess up again, and maybe that marriage ends, and you want to try again after that. Do that. And maybe marriage is not for you, and you need to find someone on this planet that you can love unconditionally. Or maybe you have children, or maybe there are children in your life that you can love that child unconditionally and get a runway to what love means in the kingdom. That we mess up and we repent. That we are harmed and we forgive. And we try again and again and again. That's the particularity that points to the universal. That's the specific that leads to the general. And if we're handling it right, then maybe when we show up in that kingdom, when we show up in that grand universal, well, oh, this is what it was all about, we're not thrown in the deep end. We get at least a small part of what our love for each other is supposed to look like. And Jesus says, don't miss it. The little things, and that's where the Pharisees and the Sadducees had a lot of trouble. Turning molehills into mountains, right? Making mountains out of molehills. It's like this little thing, this is the point right here. And that's where they're going to tithe their cumin and their mint and their dill and all that. They're just focusing on these little things. And Jesus says, that is just a microcosm. Don't miss it. And another way that we tend to focus too hard on that is when we say, well, the Bible shows us what marriage is supposed to look like. So we need to put all of our emphasis into what biblical marriage is. And this is the kind of thing, if you'll humor me for a moment, this is the kind of thing you normally only hear me say in our adult forum classes, our 9 o'clock classes. Sometimes we'll talk about these more sociological or political issues. And anytime I hear the word biblical marriage, my hackles go up and I go, oh, you want to talk about biblical marriage? Well, here we go. You think we all should have biblical marriages? All right, well, go ahead and have your parents pick your spouse. That's step one. And then that spouse is going to be for economic purposes, to combine the resources of the two families, to maintain the territory, the patriarchal lineage of the territory, And that's why you got to make sure you know exactly whose kid everyone is to maintain that territory. And even just pure survival. There was no sense of any guarantee that a family was going to live to the next generation, or that a tribe was still going to be here 3 generations from now. And biblical marriage, if we want to call it that, was that economic arrangement. It was a survival arrangement. Do you know any married couples that are like that? We don't have biblical marriage.
I do.
Oh, Trish knows one.
What?
Okay.
And it was back in the 90s. But her parents, she met this guy in Australia, and he wrote to her and said, God told me to marry you. And she said, well, you didn't tell me that. but if my dad and my brother, you know.
But we have to go 5,000 miles away for that example, don't we?
Yes.
So,
in a very strange way.
Very strange. But I don't hear anybody calling for that when they say biblical marriage, right? And Jesus puts marriage out there for us, and the Bible puts marriage out there for us as a way to love unconditionally. And who would that be close to? That's not going to be specific to your gender. That's not going to be specific to your sexual orientation. Jesus says, find somebody. Love them the best that you can. Love them with the love of God. And when you have done that and you find yourself on the other side in that resurrected life, hopefully you can think back to the life you just lived. And those of you who are in the 9 o'clock class about the good place are already in this zone. You'll be able to think back to that life you just lived and say, oh, I get it. And I see how I could have done so much better. And yet, I'm a little bit prepared for this. But Jesus, when he takes our focus off of the little nitpicky stuff that they always bring to him, he'll put it in a universal context, but then he always brings it home again. Because there is that danger that we're just going to live in the future. We're just going to live in the hereafter. We're going to live in heaven, and we're all going to be just like, well, it doesn't matter what happens here. As long as we make sure and drag as many people into heaven as we can, then we've done okay. But Jesus is like, no. And you see him finish that answer with, Moses affirmed that our God is the God of the living and not of the dead. So he said, yeah, we were just talking about death. Yeah, we were just talking about the afterlife. But now forget all that and come back to right where we are. Think about the people in your life who you can love unconditionally. Maybe that is a spouse, a child, multiple children. Maybe that's a neighbor. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's a person sitting next to you. Just look at me, don't look at them. Don't make it awkward. It could get awkward. We can't do a lot, but we can do something. We can love one person unconditionally. We can maybe even love 3 or 5 people unconditionally. And we shouldn't let the realities of the hereafter and the confusion of that and the doubts about that cloud the reality of what's at the very center and foundation of what we're doing here, of who we are. And just yesterday, I was looking at my pectoral cross, which I call out sometimes. And I get emotional about it sometimes because this is my seminary cross that a fellow seminarian, a friend of mine, designed it, who's a wonderful artist. But there was some question about what belonged at the center. They had put Alpha and Omega at the top and bottom of the cross, which is the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet, and where Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega in Revelation. I believe we just read that last night at the memorial service for Dan Thomas. Jesus is the beginning and the end, Alpha and Omega. But what belongs in the middle? What is at the very heart of who we are? And so I put an idea out there, and I said, well, what about when Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment? Now, in one gospel, we have him just coming straight out and saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. But there's another one, I think it's Mark, that says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." He is rooting it in the centering prayer of all of his Jewish faith. And then he says, "You shall love." Ahavta. And that's the Hebrew word that's at the center. Ahavta. Let's just say that word, ahavta. Isn't that beautiful? Feels good. And when we get confused, whether it's about heaven and hell or the afterlife or what should I do in the world, how should I live, we can always come back to that one central thing because Jesus said we could. You shall love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love.